Hey everyone, welcome to Wildlife Inspired. Today we're going to talk about something that I think is not talked about nearly enough with bird photography, and I think it is one of the most important, maybe even the most important thing when it comes to my bird photography: locations. Right after this. There are hundreds of videos out there on bird photography, maybe thousands of videos out there, and they're going to talk about gear and shutter speed and equipment and lighting and all these things. And I do some videos about that too. What you don't see a lot of videos about is, to me, one of the most important aspects of bird photography, and that's the importance of the location that you're using. So in this video, I'm going to talk about locations and why I use them and how I use them and why they are so absolutely critical to my personal bird photography. And if you're a beginning bird photographer, maybe encourage you to think about this a little bit more. Now, I try to break my videos into very practical pieces. So I've got four things I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about, let me just look down here at my notes. I'm going to talk about reliable and repeatable locations, meaning the birds are always there. I'm going to talk about habitat and the importance of finding locations that have really great habitat. I'm going to talk about color and perspective, and then I'm going to talk about privacy. And for each of these things, I'm going to show you a real location. So I'm going to show you multiple images from the exact same location, trying to re-emphasize these four concepts. Now I'm back on my Flickr page. If you've seen my other videos, you know a lot of times I reference this Flickr page, and it's a way for me just to put all of my content out there in public. The video or the quality of the images is a little bit better. I do downsize everything to 1500 pixels for social media. That's just an average of, Instagram, Facebook, Flickr. So I just try to have one sizing format that I use. I settled on 1500 pixels years ago, and I still use it. I may adjust it at some point, but right now that's what I'm at. So you can actually go to my Flickr page, S-Keys Images, pop on the albums, and you're going to see a bunch of albums that all correspond to YouTube videos. And this one's called Location. So this first concept I wanted to talk about was just reliability and repeatability. So I use the same locations for songbirds, maybe 10, 15 locations, and each one I can predictably tell you what I can expect to be there, especially from late spring to summer. Now, that's because birds are typically breeding in the same areas all the time. I'm going to get some questions down at the bottom. Anytime I talk about songbird videos or mention the topic, somebody down in the comments mentioned something about, how do you attract the birds, use of callback. I really want to keep this topical to locations. I may do another video on my personal use of callback and things like that. I will tell you, just as a general rule, I feel really good about my ethics in bird photography. I sleep like a baby every night. I honestly think I give back a lot more than I ever take, but I do recognize that as a photographer in wildlife, I have some impact on birds. My goal is to minimize that impact while maximizing the images. And it's just a foundation that I use in my ethics. And again, I feel very comfortable having done this now for 10 years and scaled back some of the things that I used to do while still trying to maximize getting the images that I get today. So let's talk about this first location. All three of these species, same location, literally over the course of the last 5 years. These three birds will be here every single year within a quarter mile of each other. I'm going to take it, and this is, again, all three of these species, exact same location within a quarter mile. And I'm shooting these from my car. I'm literally just driving down, parking, and listening for the birds to be there. They're always, always there. Second location, again, from my car. These two species right next to each other. Black-throated green, Canada warbler, they're always there. Always, every year. These were taken over the course of a couple years. Always there. Always at eye level, and I always get fairly, I shouldn't say always, that Canada warbler has stumped me. I've visited this location maybe 15, 20 times. About half the time I don't get very good looks, but the other half of the time I do get looks. And this was one of my better looks at a Canada warbler here. So knowing locations in terms of reliability and repeatability, and it's not just songbirds. There are certain locations I have for waterfowl. I know if I go to this lake, bufflehead will be there. I know common mergansers will be there. I know hooded mergansers will be there. And it's different species on different lakes, and sometimes even different parts of the lakes will have different species. Now, how do you learn all this? It's a lot of trial and error, and it's a lot of scouting, and it does take time. And one of the reasons I think people get impatient with bird photography is they don't allow themselves enough time to figure out what works. I could show you images from my first year and second year that were terrible. They just weren't very good. As I was learning, what I didn't realize and I didn't place a value on was the location and not the species. So, for example, and I think this is typical of a lot of first year photographers, I used to take Google Maps, and anything that was green on Google Maps, I would go look for birds. I would go on eBird, and anywhere that reported birds that I thought were cool, I would go there and try to photograph them. And what I ended up with were shots like this. Now, these aren't particularly good images, but this is what I was shooting the first couple years I was out. The locations didn't photograph well. The birds were over my head often, not at eye level. So while I was seeing some species and I was excited to see them, I wasn't really in the right location to get the images that I want. And as I got out more and more, I started to realize these same birds are in the same locations all the time. And there were some locations that were very, very repeatable. I've got 27 warblers that breed in the state. I can tell you exactly where every one of those warblers breeds in my state. I have a location for every warbler that breeds in my state. Now that took about 4 or 5 years to accumulate that information, and then also figure out which of those locations actually photograph well, because they did not all photograph well. A true story about this predictability and reliability. Real story. I was out photographing a hooded warbler one day, and I took an image, and the hooded warbler had little bracelets on, these little bands that banders use to gather scientific data. And I actually had a friend that had been doing some data in that area collection on hooded warblers for the last few years. And I thought it'd be cool to send him the image. Now, I didn't expect him to be the one that banded the bird, but I thought he might find it interesting. So I send him the image, and he says, I banded that bird. Now, without telling him where I was, he sent me a ping and said, did you find it here? Remember, this is the same individual bird. We're talking about the same individual bird. I photographed that bird exactly where his ping was. And the reason he knew it was there is because he told me over 3 years, and I photographed him in the 4th year, but for the 3 years previously, that same bird had migrated to South America and returned to the same tree 2 out of 3 years. And in the 3rd year, it found a nesting site about 50 feet away. Now you think about that. That's just absolutely incredible. I think most people see birds and they assume it's a different bird of the same species all the time. If you're in the same location, I bet you I have photographed the same individual bird year over year in the same location at some point. So it is really neat to understand how these migration patterns happen and how these breeding sites are selected and how the birds often come back to the exact same nest every single year. So that's reliability. You find locations that are reliable, that are going to have birds, particular species, but make sure they also offer you the perspective that you're looking for, and in many cases, the lighting and the perches, which we're going to talk about next. So the next category I wanted to talk about was finding locations that have great habitat. I'm going to show you a series of images, all taken from the exact same field. Now, not necessarily from the same spot. I'll walk up and down this trail. And typically I'm working with limited species. So only about 2 or 3 species breed here. But what I have an opportunity to do is now feature the plants that surround them and the habitat that surrounds this species. So you're going to see a lot of common yellowthroats here, some juveniles, some females, some adult males. And these are all on the same patch of coneflowers. I can go here every year. These, it's pretty cool when you watch the behavior year after year. And these were not all taken the same year, by the way. These were taken in different years. These common yellowthroats like to perch on the tops of these flowers. Not all the time, but if you're there long enough and you spend enough time, you end up with some really neat images. Another field, this is a different portion of the same field. We'll have, again, common yellowthroats, but again, some different species. Indigo buntings here. This was a field sparrow taken in the same field. Another common yellowthroat in the same general area, same field. So really, I'm able to utilize these locations to focus on the plant diversity and not necessarily the bird diversity. Now, that's my interest as a native plant photographer, so there's a lot of carryover for this. But I would say once you find these locations that are really, really beautiful, and notice everything's eye level because this is down in a low-growing scrub. So you're talking perches between 3 and 8 feet tall for the most part. So everything I photograph is in that nice eye level range. This is a Maximilian sunflower is the plant. I love the curve of that plant. And this is the same field. And what I wanted to show you is it wasn't just for summer. This same field also attracts sparrows in autumn, and I was able to take advantage, and I have a whole series from this field of autumn colors. So finding that habitat can be really, really great, and it's wonderful to explore. I'm not chasing the birds. I'm finding great habitats and they are repeatable. I use about 3 different meadows for various songbirds. And again, typically it's the same type of songbirds. I get a lot of common yellowthroats. So what I try to do is get a lot of variety in the colors, in the plants, and sometimes in the perches. And I really, really, really enjoy shooting these meadows. So habitat, and sometimes I'll show you an example in a minute where it's not just the habitat, but it's also the perches. You may find individual perches that photograph really well. And I have an example of that coming up. Next, I want to talk about color and perspective. I want you to notice these 3 different species. Notice the similarity in the colors here. It's a red-breasted nuthatch, black-throated blue. I think I've got maybe a couple more here, black and white. But notice the similar pattern in these is the background colors, these fall colors in the background. This is the same location. And literally, I'm guessing I'm sitting possibly on the same rock for some of these. A couple perches in this area. I wanted to talk about color and perspective. So these fall migratory birds, and that's what these are. These are all migrating fall warblers. It's very, very random. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. But when they are, I get very, very close looks. I've come to find this one location very, very favorable for me. I don't share it with other people. I'll talk about that when we get to privacy. This is my own spot. This is a spot I just love to go to and be by myself and wait for these warblers to show up in the morning. I'm going to show you some close looks. We talked about perspective as important. One of the things with all of my songbird photography that I try to do is find a little bit of elevation. So if I'm not working in those meadows and scrubs, I'm trying to get my vantage point to be at the top of the canopy if I can. So with birds like vireos, this is a blue-headed vireo, they're not ground-dwelling birds. These are birds that like mid-canopy and up. So you have to be in the canopy to do that. And so I've got a lot of locations. Here in Pennsylvania, we have a lot of hills. So I'm able to use a lot of these ridges and hills to get some perspective. In other areas of the country, it may not be as practical. Another blue-headed vireo. And look at all these perspectives. You can see they're all eye-level perspectives. This is the same location for all of these. Same location for all of these, all in fall, year after year. This was the image you're looking at now is 2020. These Philadelphia vireos I've seen for the last 4 years in the exact same spot at the exact same time of the year. First 2 weeks of September, these Philadelphia vireos are in the exact same spot every year, migrating. So they just happen to come through the same area every year. Now this location, this is a spring image. This is a separate location, but I do want to show you how favorable these locations can be. I use this location over and over and over. I am the only photographer I have ever seen at this location. I keep it to myself. I don't tell anybody. I love having this location to myself. It's actually fairly easy to access. The only other humans I've seen there were involved in an act that I cannot describe on TV. Same location in fall. So notice in spring, different look, but look at the nice perspective. So this location offers me perspective and it offers me this great morning light. This area catches the morning light. So when you learn locations, you're not just learning about the perches and the birds, you're really focused on light. I'll show you some examples when I get to the waterfowl about how really particular light can be and how interesting it can be and how you can absolutely maximize it at certain times of the day. So first light here. This was an art image I did. I must have accidentally dropped the wrong file in here, but I'm not going to edit it out. We'll keep that in there. Love this image. Same location. Notice the eye level look. Migratory. You can tell this is a chestnut-sided warbler for those that know birds. This bird has very different plumage in fall. And this is what they look like in fall. And now I wanted to talk about those perches. So I'm going to use one example of perches. So I find these are mountain ash berries, and I have a location that I use. All of these were taken over the course of 3 to 4 years. So everything you're going to see is a different species. I have eight species here, all the same grouping of plants. So all in the same area. I may be on one rock or a different rock, but I'm in the same general area for all of these. Black-throated blue, northern parula, blue-headed vireo, black-throated green, black, oh, I almost said blackpoll, bay-breasted warbler. They look similar in fall. Bay-breasted warbler, Tennessee warbler, tough one for me, red-eyed vireo. All from the same spot, all in morning light in a location that photographs really, really well. I will use this as one example of perches. You could find an infinite number of perches that work really, really well, or types of perches. I showed you the meadows that have some really great perches, so I know those cone flowers work really well. It just takes time. One of the characteristics, I think, of great wildlife photographers, it might be different than other photography. In wildlife photography, I think patience is one of the most important attributes. I'm talking about locations being extremely important, but the attributes that make up who you are. If you are patient and determined, and you can put in the grind and work, kind of work year after year, and put that learning into. With wildlife, you're not always learning about how the camera works. You're not always learning the technical sides of photography. With great wildlife photography, a lot of times what you're learning is behavior, locations, like I'm talking about in this video, patterns, how things work, and then a lot of times it's lighting. How does the light interplay with the locations that you're working at? A lot of it gets back, again, just being patient and willing to go out, try different things, scout areas, learn where the birds are, learn where the perches are, learn where the fields are. And it makes these things very repeatable. And then the last one, this is, again, it's a chestnut-sided warbler. I showed you it before in a different location, and here it is on some of that mountain ashberry. Now, the last thing I want to talk about with locations is privacy. It sounds a little, and people have very differing opinions on birding and sharing. So I will give you my personal belief on this. This is just my personal belief. If you're a birder watching this video, you may have a strongly different opinion on this. If you're a photographer who has experienced the things I've experienced over the last 10 years, you may understand my concern for privacy. So I don't share any locations with anybody. That's it. And I'm going to show you these spots for ducks. These are very, very difficult for me to find. It has taken years for me to find locations that work really, really well. Not all of them are private, meaning this particular one is taken at a public lake, a large lake with a lot of coves. This particular cove works very, very well for me. And you could see the morning light. This is a set of buffleheads that came in, kind of worked the cove, came around the cove, and came right in front of my camera. The light here is the same every morning. So I can get this look. Here's another one. I can get this look every morning I go to this location. Now, will a duck be there? I don't know. But if the ducks are there, this particular location works really well. It's a public lake, but I have a very, very specific spot that I use. Now, if I show up to get here in the winter, if I wake up at 5:30 in the morning, drive 45 minutes north, it's 30 degrees out or 40 degrees out, it's cold. I show up, I get my gear, I hike down the trail to my spot. I'm calling it my spot. I get to that spot and there's somebody else there because I told somebody who told somebody who told somebody. That's a disaster for me. That has ruined my day. So some of it is absolutely selfish. I just don't want to put time and energy into going somewhere and then having somebody else be there. So a lot of this is for selfish reasons. Now, this location I wanted to show you, I want you to notice some similarities in light. This is 2017. That's when I found this location. This is 2022, 2020. That's a different location. But these three images taken from the same spot, all in the afternoon. So in this location, I get better afternoon light. The buffleheads that I showed you before, it's better morning light. So knowing the location and how the light hits was absolutely essential in creating these images. This location in the morning looks very, very different. I'm not saying it's awful, but it just looks very, very different. In this location, I love how the light hits the background in the afternoon. So notice this background is really nice and bright. This one I made a silhouette. And then here again, you could see how it's hitting this nice, you get these nice golden tones toward the end of the day in these backgrounds. So I really, really liked that. And then I want to show you one more location. And this is a fairly new location for me. It's one that I plan on using. I'm going to show you 2 images from this location. And for here, it was proximity. The way this little outlet works, the ducks come around this peninsula. So you're at the end of a peninsula. And look, I mean, look at this. I have another picture of this scalp. He literally came into minimum focus. I'm in a blind. I always use a blind for waterfowl photography. But the location here was all about, it gets some really nice morning light, by the way, but it was all about the ability to get really, really close. I've gotten wood ducks from this location at minimum focus. So it's just a really, really ideal spot for that. And again, I don't share this with anybody. This is a spot that I really, really have come to like. Takes me an hour to get there. In the winter, I'm setting up really, really early. Again, if I drive out there and there's another photographer there, my day is ruined. I just absolutely wasted my day. From a birder standpoint, there's a philosophy in birding that sharing is good. We want to get the community involved. We want to get others to see what we see. And there's a feeling that from a conservation standpoint, sharing is better with birding. Now, I'm not a birder as much as I'm a bird photographer. For me, it's much, much different. If I said to public forums, hey, I photographed this bird, this is exactly the spot that I take it at, well, it's bad. Like, it's bad for me and it's bad for the location. All of a sudden, people start going there. This little trail that's kind of delicate gets trampled. Birds start to get pushed away. People are showing up midday. The birds stop coming because there's now people around, and it's just not ideal for what I do. Again, I get that there's people down in the comments. You could tell me you're selfish. I understand all of that stuff. I can understand how it sounds that way. At the end of the day, for me personally, protecting the location is more important than sharing the information. Now, if I see a rarity at a public park, I'm absolutely glad to share that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about these very specific private locations that photograph very well, that have value to me. I just don't feel the need to share that with other people. Sometimes it's taken me years and years to find these spots. I feel no obligation to put them out to the public for free for those reasons. All right, another location, different location. Notice the background here, afternoon location. This morning location, the sun hits that background in the morning. In this location, it hits the background. Oop, let me jump over. It hits the background in the afternoon. I want you to notice, again, just proximity. I'm going to show you 2 or 3 from this set. Look at this. This is just a wild duck migrating, swimming literally right past my lens at minimum focus. Had no idea I was there. I'm buried in a bunch of reeds, got some camouflage on me. And this duck just happened to come right around the corner. I was elated because I very rarely photograph ruddy ducks, and this one was just right there. Again, this is a public lake, but in a very specific private area on that lake, which I've never seen another photographer. I've never seen another birder. It's a little bit of a little cove that just has this really ideal location. Took me a couple years to figure out this lake and where to photograph it. And now that I've got that spot, again, with the theme of privacy, I'm going to keep it to myself. And that's just the way I feel. So a little more, I guess we would call this an educational video today. I hope you liked it. It's a little different than some of the other videos I've done lately. Let me know down in the comments, do you like this type of video? I can do maybe a couple more of these. But again, most of the stuff I do keep on Patreon. This channel, I keep it pretty light with content. I like the opinion pieces that I put out here on YouTube. I've got a couple more of those coming out soon. So pay attention. Make sure you're subscribed, and there's a little bell down there. For those of you that don't hit that, that's going to give you notifications. I only put out a video about once every week or 2, so you're not going to get tons of notifications from this channel. So there's absolutely no harm in just hitting that little button. And then when I do create a new video, you'll be able to see it first. Thanks for your support on the channel. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope we can continue to find inspiration in wildlife together.